Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. On our show Uncensored, we have a special guest. We will be discussing the political asylum that is available now for people from certain countries and all the misinformation that's been going on, especially in the media. And also the political climate that we have right now. It also seems every time that there's a political election, um, different teams switch sides and they start using immigrants as a scapegoat to get people to vote for them. And it's very sad. The last time that we had Ms. Luz from the Southern Poverty Law Center discussing the immigration flood of people, the caravans and all that, it was the same thing. It was a political tactic being used by Republicans, and then the Democrats jumped on it, and they were just scapegoating Latinos like we usually go through. But our guest is Julia M. Ponce Vega. She's the Director of Immigrant Services at Mercy Center. Can you tell us a little bit about what Mercy Center does and how did you get involved with them?
Sure. Mercy Center has been providing different types of services to the community. It started literally in a school in the South Bronx. It comes from the Sisters of Mercy. We provide adult education, workforce development, immigrant services, family programs that are really geared to empower and uplift the community in the South Bronx, which is one of the most uh, disadvantaged and disenfranchised, I would say, areas in all of the United States. So what I do in under the Immigrant Services program is I basically do what is called affirmative filings, mainly assisting people, providing free legal assistance with filing applications for naturalization, DACA renewals, green card renewals, TPS, which is temporary protected status, and also providing different types of legal consultations on very limited types of immigration relief that are available. And we also work with the New York Legal Assistance Group to provide representation for those cases that are more complex. For example, asylum seekers that are in removal proceedings. Removal proceedings is when your case, you're in front of a judge, and if you don't win your asylum case, then you will end up being removed. Because I ended up getting involved with them after working also in the South Bronx previously as a staff attorney, primarily handling removal defense cases of asylum applicants and also affirmative asylum applications before the New York Asylum Office. And so after doing that, I was saw an opportunity to broaden up my professional practice. And because I'm committed to working in the South Bronx, uh, that's how I ended up at Mercy Center.
When you say that the Bronx is one of the most disenfranchised communities, can you tell us a little bit about the background? All that people have seen in the news is uh, these, I don't know if they are old buildings or apartment complexes that are being used for immigrants to live in parts of New York. And then you have conservative pundits and so-called wannabe reporters stand outside of it and say, look, it's getting out of hand. There's all these people. Even the mayor doesn't know what to do with them. Is that part of what you're discussing, or is that different in the Bronx?
Well, it was always, I mean, even prior to what's happening right now with the asylum crisis, right, or the asylum seeker influx, the Bronx historically has been disadvantaged and disenfranchised. I would say that the majority of the population is, even though prior it was um, largely like Irish and Italian. Through the 70s, it became like, I don't know, I'm sure that there's images everywhere of how the Bronx was on fire. There was a rezoning and redevelopment. Um, and you have a large Black and brown population that where the majority lives under the 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. So you're talking about even, New York, Manhattan, which is like one of the most expensive places in the world to live, where an average apartment, maybe a one bedroom, you pay $4,000 for. The Bronx, you pay, and then still it boggles my mind because I walk around and I'm also part of the community in a way, to see how expensive things are when people are earning, minimum wage, if that, but they're paying to live in dilapidated buildings with tons of housing violations. There's tons of over policing. Even just you could just be a Latino kid standing outside of your building and potentially get arrested just because of you being accused of loitering by other police officers who are actually some of Latino origin or background themselves, which you're not going to see as much maybe in Manhattan or in Queens, or in certain parts of Queens, but because just of how disenfranchised they are economically, they're that's what really brought me to the Bronx. To see how I can assist me myself, just to share a little bit about how I ended up becoming an immigration attorney. I was born in El Salvador. I fled with my family in 1988, right before the war came to the capital, and I came to the United States with my family seeking asylum. At that time, it was just incredibly difficult, as it still is, to win. We actually ended up getting our legal permanent residence status through a employment-based petition from my mother's employer at that time, because it was just going to be really difficult to actually win an asylum case, even though my father had been kidnapped, extorted. Um, but again, this is still, we can see that now. I However, we were lucky that we didn't have to come through the border like the majority of the asylum seekers that are coming now. We actually had visas to come into the United States, but it's it, it's still hard. To the odds of you winning an asylum, whether it is affirmatively, you can spend years, depending on when you logged in your asylum application, because the USCIS asylum offices have, uh, since 2021, implemented a policy that's called last in, first out, because they have historically always been backlogged. So at that I think it was January of 2021, where anyone that was applying for asylum affirmatively. So let me backtrack a little bit, because it's important to know, for people to know what what the differences are. But even before that, in order for someone to be eligible to apply for asylum, they have to fit into the definition of a refugee. And under the definition of a refugee, which you find in the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 101, A42, a refugee is someone who is outside of their country of last residence or nationality, or without nationality, and who is unable or unwilling to return to their country, and is unable or unwilling to avail him or herself of the protection of that country because of persecution, or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of one of the five protected grounds. And what are the five protected grounds? Where their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. What is membership in a particular social group? Well, it depends. A particular social group is a group within society, um, is defined by particularity, meaning you know who is in and who is out, and that is socially distinct, meaning that, like, you know that that person belongs to a particular group, like LGBTQ persons, right? So that will be considered like a particular social group, or maybe victims of domestic violence in countries where there are high femicide rates, or maybe um, it, and it's kind of difficult because it really depends on a lot of the case law. So we have the statutes and the law, but the courts are the ones that interpret the statutes and the law. And it depending on which circuit of the federal courts in the United States also impacts whether a particular social group, depending on how it's crafted, is actually a viable social group in a particular circuit based on the case law that has come out of that circuit. So what does that mean? So you have to establish that you have suffered past persecution, and that you, because of that, you have a well-founded fear of future persecution. But it can't be like, oh, I just left, I fled because there's no food, there's no jobs, and crime's out of control. That's not an asylum. It has to be like the harm that the person suffered has to be on account of that particular of that protected ground. And either who's the persecuted, who's the one that's inflicting that harm. Well, it's either the government itself or an actor that the government is unable or unwilling to control. And because of that, you're unable to avail yourself of the protections of the country where you're a national of or you last habitually resided. And you also have to demonstrate that there is nowhere in that country that you can move to that you are not going to be subjected to that harm. And what kind of harm rises up to that to the level? Well, it could be physical harm, it could be emotional and psychological harm, it could be sexual harm, you could be detained, and also it could be cumulative. And aside from that, you have to also um, have proof. So imagine, let's say you've maybe let's say I'm an indigenous person, Mayan or Quiche, living in Guatemala, and all of a sudden the government decides that they want to take over the land that we have inhabited for centuries, right? And now we're going to be displaced, and because of how native peoples are treated in many countries, um, they're not afforded the same levels of protections, and they're discriminated against, and they're seen as like second, like when we say here second class citizens, well, they could be seen that way. So no one's really going to, and I say this because there's a lot of country conditions reports, and other think tanks and other NGOs working on the ground in the country of origin, or even actual reports published by the government, where like these populations are not afforded that level of protection. And so let's say they come and they try to take our land, and they threaten us with death if we don't leave, right? And we're if I'm Quiche and I speak Quiche, I barely even understand English because I'm indigenous, right? And I know that they're coming and they already did burn down the houses of my neighbors, and I decide to flee, and I think, oh, I'm gonna go and take this dangerous trek and expose myself to all kinds of harms, making my way to the southern border to seek asylum, right? Because I've been persecuted because I was threatened with death based on an protected ground, which meaning like my nationality and my ethnicity, because I'm Quiche, and I come to the United States to seek protection because my government is not going to protect me with my right to do that. But I have to then use an app that the Biden administration has implemented, which is called CBP1, to be able, meanwhile, who, it's so maddening to think that someone who's fleeing for their lives ran out, so that they wouldn't get killed, is gonna, for one, especially thinking of someone that's indigenous, that speaks an indigenous language, is gonna be able to have on hand when they show up all like types of proof to support their claim, and then also be expected to use an app on their phone to be able to then get an appointment to then be able to present themselves to a port of entry to then ask for asylum. And if they, and what we know since the rollout of CBP1 is that there's been all kinds of issues with it. Like the app is notorious for crashing. Not everyone might have even a phone. Even in that whole trajectory, you could have been kidnapped by the Zetas or a whole host of different criminal organizations. You could have been raped. You could have been detained. Some are even killed, and then you make it through to find to navigate a very confused and hectic process to then be able to present and say, I want to seek asylum because I was persecuted in my own country. And it's not like the sea customs and border patrol officers who you'll encounter. It's just very adversarial, and it's not in some of the time that it could take for you to then even be able to go and be present your claim after having made that CBP1 app, could be almost a whole day. So it's very and even then once you get there, it's not like they have um interpreters of like indigenous languages or any all types of languages to be able to really uh ask you the questions needed for you to stake a claim or say or express what's called a credible fear. So once you're actually allowed in, this is the lawful pathways, right? You get your appointment on CBP1, so then you'll be able to present yourself at the border and then explain why you're seeking asylum and be able to demonstrate that you have actually that your fear is credible, and then you're allowed to come in. But it's not like you come in, oh hey, great, you're here, welcome to the United States, here's your green card, and go on your merry way. That's not the case at all. What ends up happening is that you end up getting placed in remote proceedings. You're giving notice to appear, which eventually you'll wait maybe a few years before you have the opportunity to present yourself before an immigration judge, who then will evaluate your claim and see whether or not you will be granted asylum. But that could all take many court dates because, for one, there is no right to representation before immigration court. There's no right for, like, with the criminal justice system, where if someone gets arrested and they don't have money to pay an attorney, and an attorney will be appointed to them. That's not the case in immigration. If you don't have an attorney, then you're just gonna have to navigate what's a real complex process. And even when you do have an attorney, it's not guaranteed that you're actually gonna win asylum. So it's I'm sorry if I veered off, but that's one of the things that you hear a lot. And then it's like, oh, so people just get all these caravans are coming in and they're making it through the border and we don't care. Well, that's not true at all. Actually, even within this administration, just in I use there's a system called track, which is the transnational records clearinghouse out of Syracuse University, and it basically tracks statistics as to like how many cases for asylum, whether defensive or affirmative. Affirmative is when you came in through a legal port of entry. Maybe you came in with you had to come in with a visa, and you're not in immigration proceedings, so that you can apply for asylum, but you have to do it before you hit a year of having entered the United States. If you don't apply within that year, you have to demonstrate extraordinary circumstances, which is a really high bar to come that and provide proof that prevented you from filing your application within a year of entering the United States. defensive, as in the example that I was describing. When you come in through the border, you don't have authorization to come in. Authorization, I mean, like a visa on your passport that to travel to the United States. And so you are issued a notice to appear, which basically starts your deportation proceedings before an immigration judge.
So I send you a recording from the Bill Maher show on HBO, aired on November 3rd, 2023. And there he had Fareed Zekaria and Ian Bremmer just making fun of the asylum process and saying that they brought back catch and release, that anybody can just come in and make up a story. And it seemed like it was almost planted to dismiss the number of immigrants that are coming from countries that the U.S. has had diplomatic relations and is trying to topple the Venezuelan regime and things like that. So to respond to that, what would you say when people are saying that it was better under Trump when he used the pandemic to keep everybody out and there was cities of refugees in the borders? And I heard from someone lately that all that is gone, that you can't even find the people that were there in tents before. So what did the Biden, the presidency, do with all those people? And are they truly just letting anybody in? And that's why there's a crisis in New York.
That is not true at all. I mean, I can't believe that, you know, they were not even, they love fact checking people, but they weren't even do their research. Actually, there's more, even after Title 42, which was the emergency under COVID-19 that was used under the prior administration, not to slow down people coming in to the border seeking asylum. Even just on July 23rd, 20 of this year, Customs and Border Patrol issued a record number that was not even seen during the prior administration of notices to appear. Now, remember, notices to appear is what starts your process of being deported. There were 44,900. These are issued to people that were found inadmissible under U.S. law. And it keeps going up. I mean, we are experiencing more people coming in, but it's not like they're all getting to come in, depending on which country they're coming from, because there's also different programs, right? Like you had Venezuelans, so that they were able to come in under a parole process, but that's different because the parole probably lasted for about 3 months. And then once that parole is done, then you have to figure out then how you're going to be able to remain in the country. If you don't, then you're already at risk of removal. Meaning, so if after that parole you weren't able to find a way to achieve permanent legal status in the United States, your situation hasn't changed. You're still going to be eventually removed if you're not eligible to apply for any type of immigration relief. And it's not like people can just come in and say, yeah, I just want to, get a work permit. In order for you to get a work permit, you have to be eligible to apply for a type of immigration relief that comes with a work permit. So with Venezuela, now you have a redesignation of Venezuela temporary protected status. Same, you also have happening with Cubans that never stopped and it's still coming. You have them now coming under the Cuban, still you have the Cuban Adjustment Refugee Act. Then you have people that came from the Ukraine and Afghanistan. So like all of these, it all depends on like the designation, the country of designation. And you also always had people coming from other countries that are not Latin America. You have people coming from the Middle East. You have people coming from Africa, all coming through the border. But it's not like they're just allowed in. If they make it through again, if they came in after, I believe it was May of 2023, and you don't go under one of those lawful pathways, such as I was describing before, using the CBP one up so that you can come in and have a credible fear interview where if you're found credible, then you are allowed to come in. and fight your case in the courts, then you're not gonna have any kind of status. So eventually you're gonna be deported. And if you're catch, let's say, it also if you didn't come that way and you enter without inspection, meaning like maybe you found a way to come in without having been detected by us in the border patrol. Well, if you were catched within the 150 miles of the border, then you're issued an expedited removal order. If again you're not eligible, pass a credible fear, and on your return immediately back on the other side of the border. So it's not like I can't believe that they're just saying that like our borders open and everyone's coming in when that's not the reality at all on the ground.
Do you see immigration as as an issue that is used during political campaigns with the Democrats to show that they're tough on crime, and with the Republicans to support xenophobia? Is that
Of course.
your assessment?
I mean, it's unfortunately, we see immigrants use as a ploy to support whatever soundbite that or whatever they want to put out there, when forgetting about that we are a nation of immigrants. And who can't, in itself, like aside from Native Americans, like we're all immigrants in this land. Um, and it's instead of focusing on what could be done, I mean, we haven't had any meaningful immigration reform in years, at least like decades, right? Like last big amnesty was in 1986. There hasn't been like no comprehensive. There have been a lot of talk about it. Yet we have over 500,000, if I'm not a little bit more, of DACA recipients, which are not all Latino, um, which are those that came uh, from under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Um, they have been, and right now they're also actually being threatened by, because we have Texas in the Fifth Circuit that's saying that, the DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is illegal. So now no anyone that wasn't able to apply before for a number of reasons is now unable to apply, because the Department of Homeland Security is prohibited under this injunction from granting any initial DACA applications. So you have over, I think it's like actually 650,000, something like that, DACA recipients living throughout the United States that are essentially in limbo because there's no path for them to actually obtain legal permanent residence status. Yet they contribute immensely to our economy, in our society. And these are things that people don't talk about. We had same with uh, TPS recipients from a number of countries that have been living here, contributing to the economy, pay taxes um, for years, essentially just renewing their temporary protected status with no pathways to actually obtain legal permanent residency in the United States. So if they can villainize immigrants when it's convenient, and then also give it to them when it's convenient too, but it's not fair, and it's actually unethical to just use um, thousands of immigrants in the United States as like a ploy on both sides.
Please tell us if it's true what they're saying in conservative media, that there's chaos in the apartment complexes and buildings of New York, where you have an overwhelming amount of immigrants trying to take over the city, and the mayor doesn't know what to do with them. Is that what's really occurring at this time?
At this time, no, because I mean, it was an incredible challenge for the mayor to figure out what to do with the busloads that were coming every day, it seemed, over the summer and before that, from Texas, from Florida, and from other places, just because they didn't want the asylum seekers there. when you have a city that already had a tremendous unhoused population, where the many of the shelters already were at capacity. So of course you have busloads of thousands of people all of a sudden coming to New York City, and trying to figure out where you're going to put them. Yes, it was chaotic. There was even still there's a lot, because you also have people that don't want um, to have asylum seekers here in New York as well. And they see it as, how are you giving preference to these immigrants that are coming in when there are so many people that are homeless that you see every day on the subway or on the street, that there's no place for them to begin with. So there, what he had to figure out in the administration as to where to put them. There were a lot of bumps that hit in the road. Why? Because first there was money put into like these parking lots in the middle of nowhere, uh, to basically build 10 cities to house them, which then not soon after they were constructed, immediately flooded, and was demonstrated that they were not going to be habitable anyways. Plus now you recently had like at all the uh, facility, there used to be a hospital that had been abandoned for some time to be converted into a place. Why? Because as soon as there was not enough vacant hotels that could be transformed into shelters to be able to house the recent arrivals. And then that's how you end up with those uh, shots on the media where you see a whole bunch of asylum seekers hanging out outside of like the Roosevelt Hotel, which was one of the first that was used for these purposes to house them, not having anywhere to go, right? And then you have how did the administration had to respond to also connect them with services, and figure out also how to get them um, legal assistance for those that do qualify, not because not everyone that came is will actually be eligible to apply for asylum. So how do you then, because you don't have a right as an immigrant to an attorney when you're already in a process to be deported, or to help you navigate, which is a extremely complex process, um, through the efforts of so many of the different immigration organizations working here in New York, and volunteering their services, and working with the mayor's office to then not only be able to respond to the needs, the legal needs of these populations, but also connect them with other organizations to provide them with ways for them to sign up for like emergency Medicaid, or even to sign out for New York City ID. So it's what it was. It's not as chaotic as it was in the beginning, because this was completely unprecedented. We never seen this before in history, where you're having buses of people, immigrants being bused from the border to cities like New York, and then figuring out how to provide services to them in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Uh, but now, I mean, it's just still a lot. Like, even if at first there were no limits, well-defined limits established as to how long some of asylum seekers could be housed in these facilities. There was a lot of backlash, because there's a lot of people here in New York that also do not want these populations to be here, that were protesting and continue to be protesting. And there's been all kinds of clashes. There's even, I think there was recently somebody that literally took their car and drove right through a shelter, and it almost harmed somebody. So like it's just, it really has been, and these are, I mean, New York's full of immigrants, so it's like you're pinning um immigrants against immigrants, right? And then creating like this division of like us versus them, and no, we have more right because they just recently arrived. forgetting even just the historical basis of our own country. But it is getting better, but it's still not ideal. Now, I think there are people with families. I mean, asylum seekers family units are given maybe a maximum of 60 days to be in the shelter before they're literally kicked out and fend for themselves. And if it's not, when you, let's say, if you're a family that one of them, one of the heads of the family, right, we'll call them the principal, like, and the father, let's say the father actually suffered harm or was threatened against their lives because of a protected ground. That's what you need in order for you to be able to apply for asylum. Maybe because let's say they were Venezuelan and they were involved in the opposition to the Maduro regime and they were threatened with death. Maybe some of their family members were killed. They come here. That 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 is in itself like a protected ground, past persecution. That enables gives the presumption of uh a well-founded fear for future persecution. So meaning that could be an asylum claim. Again, it's not just because you say this happened, you still have to have proof of the persecution that you suffered. And you still have to figure out how to even fill out an application for asylum. And everything is in English, right? And if you don't have an attorney or someone that's going to help you out, you're not even going to really know how to fill it out or what you need to do to then have it lodged, meaning like at court. And then you have to wait 180 days, 50 days from when you log that application to then be able to apply for a permit.
En nuestro programa de hoy tenemos a una invitada especial, es Julia M. Ponce Vega, directora de Servicios de Inmigración de Mercy Center en Bronx, Nueva York. Y estaremos discutiendo el asilo político que está disponible para los inmigrantes. Ha habido mucha información errónea en los medios de comunicación y están usando a los inmigrantes como carne de cañón para poder pasar ideas de los dos lados políticos, de los demócratas y los republicanos. Si nos puede decir un poco de cómo empezó su trabajo en el Mercy Center y cuál es su labor con los inmigrantes en esa organización.
Yo empecé a trabajar en Mystic Center hace 2 años porque es una organización que admiro inmensamente por todo el trabajo que está haciendo ya por 30 años en el Bronx, Nueva York, uno de los condados más pobres en todo, yo diría, los Estados Unidos, donde la mayoría de la población es afroamericana, descendencia inmigrante, latina, y muchos viven más bajo del 150% de las guías federales de pobreza, en una región que es increíblemente una de las más caras para vivir en el mundo. Igual no hay mucho acceso a trabajos, hay mucha pobreza, delincuencia, ah, pero es una comunidad vibrante, con mucha historia que aportar a los Estados Unidos en general. A mí me atrayó por el trabajo que hacen y en sí he estado trabajando como directora del programa de servicios de inmigrantes, donde nosotros ayudamos a proveer asistencia legal gratuita a personas que están interesadas en aplicar para la ciudadanía, para la renovación de DACA, que es la acción diferida para los que vinieron cuando eran niños, y TPS de las diferentes designaciones de los países, también con consultas de ajuste de estatus y asilo y otros diferentes tipos de alivios migratorios que están disponibles a la comunidad. Antes de eso, yo estaba trabajando para cadenas católicas, donde yo representaba a los que aplican para asilo ante la Oficina de Asilo de Nueva York y también a los que estaban en proceso de ser de remoción, es decir, deportación. Están peleando un caso ante un juez de inmigración en una de las tres diferentes cortes de inmigración aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York. Y lo que me atrayó es de que Mercy Center también, ellos trabajan para ayudar a empoderar a la comunidad, a, a ayudarlos a sacar de la pobreza. Si, si es por medio de los programas de educación de adultos, es programas de para aprender inglés o programas que se concentran en ayudar a la familia, cómo manejar la ira, etcétera. Y ahí viene también ahorita tenemos una iniciativa que está trabajando específicamente para ayudar a conectar a los que acaban de venir buscando asilo por la frontera con servicios y navegar también el procedimiento de cómo ellos mismos pueden meter, si son elegibles, aplicaciones para asilo. Y también trabajamos con, recibimos fondos de la Oficina de Nuevos Americanos del Estado de Nueva York y fondos del Departamento de Desarrollo Comunitario de la Comunidad y de los Jóvenes de la Ciudad de Nueva York, bajo la Oficina de Asuntos de Inmigrantes del Alcalde de Nueva York, para proveer este tipo de asistencia sin costo alguno a la comunidad. Y en sí, es una organización que admiro tremendamente. Justo ahí, esta semana ellos recibieron el premio de organización humanitaria por el Centro ah, de Estudios de Inmigración de Nueva York, por todo el trabajo que han hecho durante los últimos 30 años en esta rama. No solo con los inmigrantes, pero también con toda la comunidad del Bronx, aquí en Nueva York.
Si nos puede decir que sí es cierto lo que han estado enseñando de Nueva York, que hay apartamentos o edificios que el primer piso está lleno de inmigrantes, que está fuera de control, que el alcalde no sabe qué hacer. Lo único que vemos en los medios de comunicación son representantes de la comunidad conservadora quejándose de que Nueva York es un caos de inmigrantes y que hasta los mismos demócratas no saben qué hacer con ellos. Hay mucha información acerca de eso y haciendo ver que está fuera de control la situación con inmigrantes. ¿Eso es correcto?
En sí es una situación bien difícil porque nunca, en cuando en nuestra historia aquí en este país, tú encontrabas de que inmigrantes que se presentan en la frontera a pedir asilo, en vez los mandan, los usan para hacer puntos políticos como lo hace el gobernador de Texas. En cuando tú encuentres de que van a llevar buses y encima de eso han usado a personas bajo promesas falsas para convencer a la gente para subirse en esos buses bajo promesas de que ya los vamos a enviar a Nueva York, que ya les van a dar un permiso de trabajo y van a tener todo lo que tienen. Que todo es mentira. Y no solo de ahí, pero de Florida y de otros lugares, ¿no? En sí, ha sido un tremendo desafío para el alcalde, ya de que no, el sistema de albergues y nuestra población que es de esa, que no tiene dónde vivir, ya en esta ciudad los albergues ya estaban al límite. Entonces, sí, claro que en el principio fue casi un caos, así como tú lo describes, porque nunca se había esperado de que iban a venir miles y miles de personas cada día por meses, ah, siendo enviadas de otros estados, simplemente porque esos estados querían usarlos como ejemplo y sin darles la oportunidad o darles los servicios que ellos les hubieran podido proveer enviándolos aquí. Entonces, eso ha sido tremendo desafío en sí, porque no había un sistema en sí para poder darles albergue a todas las personas, incluso todavía, ¿no? En sí, muchas de las personas que vienen, que han podido llegar, ah, ahora solo tienen un límite de 60 días en estar en el albergue antes de ser sacados a ver a dónde van, ¿no? Sin ningún tipo de, si no han sido elegibles para aplicar.
Usted dice que la crisis fue una crisis creada por los gobernantes republicanos tratando de hacer quedar mal a los demócratas. En el programa de Bill Maher en HBO tuvo a Farid Zekaria y Ian Bremmer como invitados y ellos estuvieron diciendo un sinfín de locuras, que un montón de gente está viniendo, que todo el mundo los dejan entrar, que volvieron a añadir el proceso de que los los registran y luego los sueltan, que las leyes que había bajo Trump eran mejor cuando fueron durante la pandemia, y que es un desastre en la frontera. Para mí eso es, como usted dice, puntos políticos que están tratando de recibir para los demócratas. ¿Cómo usted respondería a esas alegaciones?
Es una locura que están diciendo eso, y me sorprende porque siendo, digamos, una persona que personas que están bien involucradas en y siempre les gusta hablar de figuras, no hicieron su diligencia, porque en sí nos estamos dando cuenta de que en esta administración ah, han dado o iniciado a las personas que pueden entrar, y no es que cualquier persona puede entrar, primero tienes que poder ah, usar la aplicación de la administración para hacer una cita, para poder presentarte ante los agentes de control de fronteras y aduanas, para poder decirte que tienes miedo a regresar y que quieres aplicar para asilo, y todavía pasar una entrevista que va a determinar si tu miedo es creíble. Y si esa determinación se da, tú puedes entrar, pero igual para pelear tu caso ante un juez de inmigración, que es iniciado por lo que se llama una acta de comparecencia o notice to appear. Es un documento que inicia tu proceso de ser deportado en la Corte de Inmigración, y solo julio am, los agentes del control de fronteras y aduanas dieron un número histórico de estas actas de comparecencia, que fueron como 44, casi 45,000 para inmigrantes de que no fueron considerados que fueran podidos ser admitidos bajo la ley estadounidense de inmigración. Y eso ha seguido, incluso desde hay estadísticas que lo publica se llama Track, que viene de la Universidad de Syracuse, que ellos monitorean los casos de inmigración, cuántos casos están pendientes, cuánta gente entra, de qué países ganan, qué países no. Publican de que incluso cuando terminó el título, antes de la administración previa, no estaban poniendo tantas personas como lo están haciendo ahora, en números históricos, en procesos de deportación, y no es que te agarran y te dejan ir. Si una persona no entra así como en ese proceso, ¿no? Usando la app, de que ahí es notoria para siempre, que se queda colgada, que no se puede operar. Encima de eso, asumiendo de que todo el mundo que salió, digamos, una persona de que de verdad cae en la definición de refugiado, porque ha tenido que salir de su país de origen, porque lo iban a matar, no va a traer, y encima de eso, dependiendo en qué país vino, y todos los países que tuvo que cruzar a pie, y ser expuesta a un increíble desafíos y peligros en el camino, pudo haber sido interceptada por diferentes cárteles criminales haciendo la ruta por México, por ejemplo, puede haber sido secuestrada, puede haber sido violada, hasta extorsionada, muchas cosas, ¿no? Solo para poder llegar a la frontera y tratar de buscar un teléfono para poder usar una aplicación para poder entrar. Y los que consiguen y son exitosos de cierta manera en a pasar ese proceso, no es que va a ser algo que, oh, te abren la puerta, te sacan la carpeta, bienvenido, y aquí está tu permiso de trabajo, te quedas en la casa, no, sino que simplemente vas a ser procesada y te van a dar esa acta de comparecencia para que tú después pelees a tu caso. Entonces, ¿qué hicieron? Mucho, especialmente el gobernador Greg Abbott de Texas, que es completamente anti-inmigrante, no quiso, no quería mantener y usando a todas estas personas, mejor dijo, bueno, no van a ser mi problema, se los voy a mandar a los demócratas porque ellos ellos quieren admitir a todo mundo, lo que en realidad no es así. Y enviándolos, así como también al gobernador DeSantis de Florida, enviándolos, y encima de eso se salió también de que esta gente en el principio habían contratado a personas que se les acercara y les dijera, oh, ¿sabes qué? ¿Por qué no te vas a Nueva York? Allá te van a dar permisos de trabajo, allá te van a dar dónde estar. Y como que engañándole a la gente para convencerlos con promesas falsas para que se montaran en el bus y se fueran sin saber en sí, eso es como se puede considerar como la trata de personas, ¿no? Porque los estás engañando, les estás diciendo para que mandarlos a otro lado, lavándose las manos y diciendo, bueno, no, no son mi problema, ¿no? Que vayan a ver qué hacen por allá. Y desafortunadamente mucha gente no tiene conocimiento de la ley de asilo o todo lo que implica poder ser elegible y aplicar y ganar un caso, ¿no? Entonces, no es extremadamente difícil. Incluso la mayoría están en procesos de deportación ya, y si no son elegibles para aplicar para el asilo, no va a haber ninguna manera como obtener un permiso de trabajo. No va a haber aquí, no, digamos, estamos en una ciudad de las más caras de vivir en el mundo. ¿De dónde? ¿No? ¿Y cómo? Y si no puedes aplicar y no tienes manera como obtener un permiso de trabajo, ¿cómo vas a poder proveerte a ti? Y si has venido con tu familia también. Am, es triste porque se ve, y no es que también todo el mundo que viene, lo que dicen, oh, que son criminales, en sí, hay la data lo apoya. Las personas que han sido inadmitidas porque vienen de haber cometido crímenes en sus países de origen y vienen aquí a robar y tratar en sí, no es soportado por las estadísticas actuales, ¿no? Pero sí es un desafío inmenso y desafortunadamente muchos no van a calificar y van a terminar, si no son elegibles. En sí, no es que hay cualquiera que venga o puede ser elegible para un montón de diferentes alivios migratorios. En sí, solo hay muy pocos. Si no es asilo, pues tal vez fuiste víctima de un crimen serio aquí en los Estados Unidos y has estado cooperando con la policía, supongamos, con la investigación de ese crimen, que tal vez después ellos te podrían dar una certificación con la cual tú podrías aplicar para lo que se llama una visa U, que es para personas de que han sido víctimas de crímenes serios. O tal vez es un joven menor de 18 años que entró por la frontera porque mataron a sus padres y no tienen a nadie, y tal vez conocía a alguien que estaba aquí en los Estados Unidos y deseó arriesgar todo para ver si podía obtener una vida mejor. Para esos menores, que llaman menores no acompañados, es decir, de que no han venido con un miembro de su familia y han entrado solos, puede haber tal vez un alivio que es la visa juvenil. Pero igual, todos esos procesos, dependiendo de qué país vienes, pueden ser años, incluso hasta el mismo proceso del asilo. Ah, los que aplican afirmativamente, esas son las personas que no están ante un juez de inmigración, pueden esperar años para poder entrevistarte antes un oficial de asilo. Y los oficiales de asilo no son abogados. Muchos, acaba de salir a un reporte que es recomendable sobre que lo sacó a la Escuela de Leyes de Brooklyn, hablando de que como la oficina de asilo de Nueva York es como un fiefdom, como diría que es un fiefdom, como un pequeño terreno, ah,
¿Como medieval que maltrata a los trabajadores? ¿O
pues sí, con feudal a base de ambiente tan tóxico. ¿Por qué? Porque no, no en vez de a los mismos oficiales de asilo, no les dan no los apoyan cuando quieren aprobar una aplicación de asilo, sino que buscan maneras como enfocándose en cosas que no son materiales, es decir, que son de menor importancia, o ver cualquier razón para negar el caso. Y cuando un caso es negado ante la oficina de asilo de USCIS, que es Servicio Estadounidense de Ciudadanía e Inmigración, es referido a la Corte de Inmigración. Ahí la persona tiene como un otro chance para poder presentar su caso de asilo y tal vez puede ganarlo ante un juez. En ese reporte entrevistaron no solo a oficiales de asilo que trabajaban anteriormente en esa oficina, y también a jueces de inmigración, a abogados privados, abogados de inmigración, sobre cómo es hasta fueron varios jueces que salieron en ese reporte diciendo no tenía sentido cómo se desgasta todos estos recursos cuando ciertos casos hubieran sido podido ser aprobados inicialmente en la oficina de asilo, pero a base de las condiciones tóxicas y un ambiente extremadamente adversarial, no es posible y en sí ah, es retraumatizando al aplicante de asilo de que ha pasado ya por trauma increíble en su país de origen, saliendo bajo todo el proceso de entrar aquí, ah, digamos, y ahora tratando de decir todo lo que le pasó cada vez ah, ante un juez cuando hubiera podido ser aprobado inicialmente en la oficina de asilo, pero no lo es.
la última pregunta, para terminar, ¿usted está de acuerdo que los inmigrantes son usados como chivo expiatorio por las dos por partidos políticos? Los demócratas los usan para cuando cierran las fronteras, cuando persiguen a los inmigrantes, los deportan, ellos aparecen como fuertes en contra del crimen en los ojos del público, y los republicanos empujan ideas de xenofobia, de que los inmigrantes se quieren apoderar, quieren quitar recursos de los estadounidenses. ¿Usted ve que las dos perspectivas usan a los inmigrantes para poder ellos empujar sus ideas?
Ah, Tristemente sí. los usan de los dos lados. Porque en sí, cuando ya se acercan las elecciones, ah, sí, bueno, más los demócratas hablan más de la inclusión, de países de inmigrantes, pero ya cuando hay mucho, como decir, resistencia, los usan también como poniéndoles la culpa de que como la situación está así, cuando no es verdad. Am, y no, y en sí crean divisiones entre nosotros mismos. ¿Cómo? ¿Por qué? Porque, digamos, hay muchos latinos que están aquí que apoyan ese tipo y no cabe en mi sentido cómo es de que van a apoyar una retórica tan divisiva y tan llena de odio contra personas que se ven igual que ellos mismos. Lo que me da más miedo es lo que va a pasar ah, el próximo año, especialmente porque hay una gran división por todo el país, entre los que no quieren inmigrantes, en los que están sido influenciados por la xenofobia y a la misma vez, creo que ayer o antier fue que vi a Steven Miller, que es el arquitecto de una de las políticas más contra los inmigrantes, hablando de el plan que es por si el que fue, si la administración previa toma el poder otra vez, lo que desafortunadamente es un miedo real a lo que implicaría eso, hablando de campos de internamiento, ah, lo que se escuchaba, así como en lo que pasó durante los nazis, ¿no? Y cómo es de que podemos estar yendo de esa manera, usando esta retórica sobre los inmigrantes para apoyar tal vez un futuro así, a lo que Dios quiera no pase, ¿no? Y pero esa es la realidad. Y también y cómo crea divisiones entre nosotros mismos, ¿no?
No, le damos gracias por su tiempo. We want to thank you for your time. Nos da gusto tener a gente que realmente sabe de estos temas, explicando y profundamente cómo afecta a las diferentes poblaciones. We want to thank you for your time and for explaining in a deep way how it affects these different populations, and someone who's actually an expert on the subject versus the sound bites that we usually hear on the media. Hopefully we can have you in the future as the election is coming up so you can give us some of your wisdom. Esperemos que la podamos tener de nuevo en el futuro, sobre todo cuando ha estado hablando de cómo va a afectar la elección y cómo los inmigrantes son usados por los diferentes partidos. De nuevo, muchas gracias por su presencia en nuestro programa.
Muchísimas gracias, es been an honor. Thank you so much, ha sido un honor y cualquiera, cuando desea que estoy disponible.
Bueno,
I'm here whenever you need.
thank you and keep the good work going.
Thank you so much, and you too, spreading all this very important information to the world and beyond. Okay.
Dios la bendiga. Muchas
A
gracias.
usted también. God bless. Take care.